I didn't get a funeral invitation. There was no envelope with my name on it. No call, no email, no voice shaking on the other end of the line to say, "She's gone." Instead, I found out from a childhood friend who still lived in our old neighborhood and worked part-time at the floral shop near the cemetery. She sent me a single message, just 3 words. "Your mother passed." That was it. I stared at the screen longer than I care to admit, not because I didn't expect it. Mom had been sick for a while, but because I wasn't told. I wasn't even considered. They buried my mother and made sure I wouldn't know in time to be there. That's the kind of man my father is. In his eyes, I stopped being his daughter the day I said no. No to the law school he picked out. No to the job at his firm. No to the life he planned without ever asking what I wanted. The day I packed my things and walked away into a career he didn't understand and couldn't control, he made it clear. I was no longer family. I hadn't seen him in 7 years. But I came back, not to cause a scene. Not to reclaim something lost. I came back because even after everything, she was still my mother. And I needed to say goodbye whether anyone welcomed me or not. I didn't sit with the family. I stood at a distance. Near the old oak tree at the edge of the cemetery. My coat buttoned high, my hands in my pockets. Watching. The ceremony was already in progress. A small crowd had gathered. Familiar faces. Neighbors, former colleagues of my father. People who used to smile at me when I passed them on the sidewalk as a kid. None of them turned to look in my direction. The air was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the wind itself didn't want to interrupt what wasn't being said. I saw my brother standing beside the casket. Hands clenched, eyes forward. He didn't cry, he never does. And my father, tall, proud, unshaken, just the way he liked to be seen. He held the program in one hand, but I knew he hadn't written a single word of the obituary himself. He just oversaw it, approved it, controlled it. Mom deserved more. There were no pictures of her childhood. No stories about her love for late-night novels or the way she used to hum while watering the roses. Only polite summaries. Vague mentions of a devoted wife and mother. As if her entire life could be squeezed into 2 neat paragraphs. I stayed until the final prayer was spoken, until the casket was lowered, until everyone began to turn and shuffle away. No one noticed me, or maybe they did, and pretended they didn't. Either way, I walked down to the grave after they left. I waited for quiet, and then I knelt beside her. No flowers, no grand gesture, just me, and a whisper. "I'm here, Mom." I was 16 the first time I realized my father only loved the version of me he could control. Before that, I thought his silence just meant he was busy, or tired, or maybe just the kind of man who kept emotion tucked deep inside his pressed collars and polished shoes. But no, his silence was never passive. It was a tool. He didn't yell when he disapproved. He didn't argue when I questioned him. He simply went quiet. And that silence said everything. It said I was wrong. It said I was a disappointment. It said, without words, that I didn't belong. When I got a scholarship to a university on the other side of the country, he didn't congratulate me. He just folded the acceptance letter and left it on my nightstand. When I changed my major from pre-law to aerospace engineering, he didn't say no. He just stopped coming to family dinners. By the time I joined a classified defense program 2 years later, he had already erased me from the family photo wall in his office. But he never once said, "I disown you." He didn't have to. The absence said it for him. What hurts the most about a man like that isn't what he says. It's what he withholds. Approval, pride, even the smallest acknowledgement. It's a kind of theft that doesn't leave bruises, but you feel it all the same. And yet, I never stopped hoping in some quiet, foolish corner of my mind that someday he'd change. That maybe the next call, the next birthday, the next milestone would be different. He never called. And by the time I stood at my mother's grave, that hope had stopped breathing too. 2 days after the funeral, I drove to the old house, not to see my father. He wouldn't have let me through the door. I didn't need to knock. The key still worked. The house was colder than I remembered, not just from the weather, but from the absence. The air had that strange, still feeling that only exists in places recently emptied of someone who mattered. The furniture was untouched. Her slippers were still by the fireplace. Her mug with the chipped handle sat on the kitchen windowsill, and the hallway smelled faintly of lavender, the scent she always used on her scarves. I didn't wander. I went straight to her bedroom. To the nightstand on her side of the bed. Third drawer down, she always kept things there. Little things she didn't want thrown out. Cards, photos, receipts from cafes she loved. And there it was, a small wooden box, no lock, no name on it. Just a smooth finish and a tiny flower carved into the top. Inside was a folded letter, my name written in her hand. Under it, an old bracelet. One I gave her when I was 12, made from plastic beads and too much glue. She wore it for a week like it was made of gold. And beneath that, a photograph, the two of us, at a science fair. I was 11, holding up a flimsy model rocket. She was behind me, smiling like I had just touched the moon. That smile wasn't in any of the funeral slideshow photos. I sat on the edge of her bed, held the box in both hands, and read her letter. Quietly. There were no dramatic confessions, no apologies, just love. A soft reminder that she saw me, even when he refused to. That she kept pieces of me close, even when I was far away. That maybe I hadn't been erased after all. I took the letter with me when I left the house, not to frame it, not to show anyone. I didn't need to prove what it said. I just needed to know that at least one person in that house had still spoken my name with love, even in silence. The rest of the world had seemed to forget it. At the funeral, I wasn't mentioned in the eulogy, not even as her daughter who couldn't be here today. There was no place for me in the family seating row. No nod, no acknowledgement. As if my existence had been cut from the narrative with surgical precision. But that box changed something. Because in that drawer, where no one else had looked, my name had survived. Written in her hand, held in her keepsakes, protected in the smallest of gestures. And for the first time in a long time, I felt steady. Not angry, not vengeful, just still. Because I finally understood something my father never did. He thought control was power. That silence could erase someone, but love doesn't work like that. It lives in the details. In an old bracelet, a childhood photo, a folded letter kept where only she would know. My name was still there, and that meant I still belonged. Not to him, not to the family who chose to forget me, but to her, always to her. The envelope arrived 3 days later, cream-colored, heavy paper, a formal seal on the back, my name printed cleanly on the front. It wasn't from my father. It was from the Department of Defense, a gala, annual recognition, national broadcast. Each year they selected one senior officer for a Lifetime Achievement Award. This year it was me. The timing felt surreal. I had spent years working in shadows. Research, field operations, international coordination. Most of it never made the news. Most of it wasn't supposed to. But someone somewhere had noticed. I didn't think twice about attending. What gave me pause was the guest list. You see, it wasn't just a military event. It was sponsored by civilian partners, foundations, government contractors, private funders. And among them was the law firm my father now sat on as chairman of the board. They were listed as one of the major contributors, and he would be there, representing them. He had no idea I was the honoree, the keynote speaker, the name on the headline banner. To him, I was still gone, still irrelevant. But the world had changed while he wasn't looking. And this time, it would be him sitting in the back of the room, watching a daughter he didn't raise walk to the stage under a title he never thought she'd earn. I didn't feel revenge. I didn't feel pride. What I felt was balance, as if the universe had finally realigned a scale he thought he controlled. The ballroom was nothing like the places I grew up in. It was grand, Polished marble floors, tall glass chandeliers, walls lined with portraits of decorated generals and silent victories. Everyone wore their best, evening gowns. Black suits, rows of polished medals on military uniforms. I arrived alone. No entourage, no spotlight. Just me in uniform with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to explain how she got there. He didn't see me right away. He was near the center of the room, holding a glass of something expensive, speaking to a cluster of men in tailored suits. Laughing the kind of laugh that doesn't come from joy, but from power. From knowing people listen when you speak. But for once, the room wasn't listening to him. As the program began, his voice faded into the background. The crowd shifted their attention. Lights dimmed, and the announcer stepped up to the podium. Tonight, we honor an individual whose service has reshaped operations across multiple defense sectors. A leader, a strategist, a name many of you don't know but should. I watched his face as they said it. Brigadier General Elise Langley. He froze, his glass paused midair. His smile disappeared. The men around him clapped automatically, not knowing what had just landed between them. And then I stepped forward. The room rose. Not just out of respect, but because it was protocol. You stand when a general takes the stage. He didn't. He stayed seated. The only one in the room who couldn't bring himself to his feet. I stood at the podium, facing a sea of strangers. Some in uniform, some in suits. Some holding cameras, waiting for a quote to headline tomorrow's news cycle. But I wasn't there for them. My speech was short. I had written it myself and rewritten it a dozen times. Removed every line that sounded like anger. Trimmed away anything that felt like a wound. What was left was truth. Measured. Calm. Clean. I spoke about service. About leadership without applause. About the kind of strength that lives in the quiet decisions no one ever sees. I thanked my team, my mentors, those who came before me. I did not mention my family, not once, and I didn't have to. Because he was there, still seated, still silent. He heard every word I chose not to say, and that silence, my silence, said more than any accusation ever could. Afterward, people lined up to shake my hand, to thank me. To ask questions, to take pictures. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't look away, just sat there small for the first time in a room where he couldn't shift the spotlight. I walked past him on the way out. No eye contact, no nod. No confrontation. I didn't need it, because dignity doesn't need a microphone. And sometimes, the loudest justice is the one you carry in your posture, not your voice. I didn't grow up thinking I'd ever wear a uniform. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I was never allowed to dream past the version of myself my father had already written. His idea of legacy was rigid, male, predictable. He had my brother's path paved by the time we were 12. Mine he left unspoken, as if I wasn't part of the equation, but names have a way of finding their own way forward. And mine did. Without his permission, without his funding, without his last name stamped on a resume. It wasn't easy. There were doors I had to force open, rooms I entered where no one expected me to stay. Decisions I made that cost me people, comfort, years of peace, but I never traded in who I was, not even when it would have been easier. That night at the gala, my name echoed in a room full of power, not because he spoke it, but because he couldn't stop it from being spoken. And maybe that was the moment it became real to him. That all the years he spent erasing me didn't work. Because there I was, standing, decorated, respected. Everything he tried to prevent me from becoming, I had become, and I did it without asking. The valet brought the car around just after midnight. The night air was cool. Quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, just complete. I walked out of the building alone. No applause, no interviews, no one trailing behind me. Just the soft sound of my heels on pavement and the fading echo of a room I no longer needed to prove myself in. He was still inside. I knew he watched me leave. from the edge of the ballroom, from whatever table he had spent the evening sinking into. But he didn't follow, because what could he say? What words could he summon that wouldn't feel like too little, too late? And I wouldn't have answered anyway. There are moments when dignity chooses silence, not because there's nothing left to feel, but because saying it out loud would make it smaller. So I didn't look back, not at the building, not at the man who once called me a disappointment, not at the childhood I had to walk away from just to become who I really was. I drove through the city with the window cracked open, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the wooden box in my lap, the one she left me, the only goodbye that ever mattered. And as the streetlights passed above, one by one, I realized something. I didn't come back to be seen. I came back to remember who I am, and I don't need his approval to carry my name.